Welcome to Deeper with Darshana, where we skip the small talk and dive down into what's raw and real. Pleasure, shame, justice, power, healing, liberation. These essential aspects of our human experience are among my favorite topics to explore, and I'm inviting you to join me. I'm your host, Darshana Avila, somatic sex and trauma expert and creator of the Erotic Wholeness Method. It is my belief that we are erotic by nature, and our erotic nature encompasses so much more than you might realize. Come along as I drop into curious conversations with other passionate pros and sensual seekers, and occasionally share musings of my own. Bring your curiosity, your sacred, messy, beautiful humanity, and all the parts of yourself. And let's go deeper together. Welcome back to Deeper with Darshana. Today, I am so excited to invite you into a conversation that I've had with two friends and colleagues of mine, Z and Victor. They, like me, have a big passion for expansive erotic expression, and that includes not just the sex and the pleasure and the goodness, but also making space for grief, making space for the hard feelings, and how important it is to get to do that in community. The three of us had a really profound and juicy conversation. We kind of live up to the title of Deeper with Darshana. So please enjoy. Welcome back to Deeper with Darshana. I am delighted to be in conversation today with Z, aka Zahava Grease of Embody More Love, a spiritual kinky dance community for personal and cultural liberation, and Victor Waring, who is an erotic rewilder, somatic sexuality educator, mentor, coach, and erotic activist. And they are both up to amazing things individually and together involved in a project that centers around the legacy of grief ritualist Simanfu Somé through their work, Grief and Eros. And I am thrilled to talk about all these juicy topics with you today. Thank you so much for being here, Z and Victor. And this one's extra special because certainly I would consider both of you in your own right professional peers and people who I respect and admire, and I love what you stand for in the world. And I know we have a lot of things in common that we value and care about. So to get together and have not just the brain trust, but the heart and the embodiment that I know that's going to pour through this conversation is deeply meaningful for me and for everybody who's going to get to listen. So thanks for being here.
Yeah, so special, extra special.
Yes.
So I'm gonna put a seed in here. I have been known to say, I am on record saying, grief is highly erotic. That is the hill I will die on. I would love to have that be where we open this conversation. What is the relationship, right? Just a little thing. What is the relationship between grief and Eros for each of you? Let's open our discussion there because we're here to go deep.
So in my work, I often talk about grief eros in a similar way that astronomers or astrophysicists talk about space and time. They usually run them together because they're actually more kind of the same thing, as we've discovered more about that. So space time. And so for me, grief and eros are these two qualities, these energies of being human that are kind of like cousins, or they're kind of like good friends that hold hands with each other, and that oftentimes one is the doorway into the other and back and forth, and sometimes they're just so overlaid on top of each other that there's no pulling them apart. So you'll have grief experiences and that will turn into erotic experience, and then back and forth, and so just hard to pull apart. It's like trying to separate the ingredients out of a cake once the cake is made.
I like that metaphor. Thank you. Now I want to go eat cake.
Yeah.
Which is something that my grief and my Eros are want to inspire.
They're down for it.
Anything you would add about your understanding of these two close friends, as Victor. I love that, evoking that idea that grief and eros are friends with one another. How do you hold these two phenomena?
Gosh. Well, I love that you asked personally, because I think
Yeah.
I'm more practiced in kind of speaking as a guide or teacher. And then there's like the personal piece. Um, there's a few things coming in right now. Um, it's for me, my body doesn't differentiate those things. It's more of like the common experience of grief and eros, of what my brain might call that, is waves, trembling, and this very big opening through here to the heart, and and sound, and this like flooding of aliveness through the central channel of the body. And I think our brains sometimes feel more comfortable if we can name, like, okay, this is grief or this is eros. But I I've come to call it trembling open.
Mm.
And wow, I think that awe and gratitude are also flavors of that have been really present in my body this week. Um, Last week, I supported my friend's conscious death, and there was a big grief ritual around her life and her medically assisted death and her burial. And so there's been so much deep sensation of like profound awe is actually like the most clear, if I could put it into a word. And I think the other piece I want to name is that there's so many gateways to grief. There's the traditional 7 gateways from Sabanfu, which we may get into, but there's this piece of like the longing for what could be, and like daring to want what we want personally, politically, spiritually, communally, financially, emotionally, like daring to really connect with what we want, and the trembling of not having it yet, or having it and having lost it, and like the eros of the intimacy of like being that fucking real with myself and my heart, and like declaring that and not shying away from what I long for, even if I'm still learning how to believe that it could happen, or how to believe that it could happen for me or for us. So I think that's also a big part of the eros of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. So much
Yeah.
just poured through you. Victor, did you want to add something?
Yeah, and just and there's just an addition there that um that when I feel into grief and eros, that they are uh larger than me states,
That's,
that they're bigger than
Yes.
they're bigger than my body, and
yeah.
and in fact, and I think this will come through in a lot of the things we talked to today, that these things are actually well witnessed, well held, and well nurtured in the body of community and in village. So I wanted to put that also in
Absolutely.
as well.
Wow, so much resonance that I'm feeling in what each of you has shared. This idea of trembling open, of aliveness, of awe, that for me is so much the common thread as well. What I experience when I'm doing hands-on, hands-in work with clients, it's not an uncommon thing, especially if it's a novel experience, which is to say, maybe this is the first time we've gotten to that stage of the work, that a client might have a climax, might have an orgasm that is deeper and more of those undulating waves than they've ever known. And then on the other side of that, they crack open and cry and cry and cry, and it's an undifferentiated grief. It's not about a particular story although I love what you named there, Z, about all that we long for, all that we want, and daring to let ourselves want that big, to love that
Yes.
big, to feel that big. And I see this happen from my clients' experience over and over again, that it's being awakened to their own aliveness in those moments. And the ecstasy of it and the agony of it are not different. They're two different sides, they're two sides of the same coin. It's sensation, it's emotion, it's, as
Mm.
you said, Victor, bigger than the body alone. And yet, when it's held by more than one, when it's well held, there's actually space for that aliveness to come through. And certainly, I've known that in my own body, never by myself, always in company, always in community, when it's been well held. So, yeah, this leads me to a question that I think is going to really frame our whole conversation here. We're having a conversation that isn't what most people in our dominant culture's understanding of eroticism and grief is. Why do you believe, why do you think that most people in our dominant culture have such disconnected relationships to grief and eros, or misunderstand the true nature of them? Like, what do you see as the reason for that?
I really get the deeper with Darshana. I love this. This is great. I love this.
Just
Like, yes, all the things I want to talk about.
I'm not going to ask you how your day was. Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, wow. I have so much to say, and I want to distill it into a fertile, collaborative experience. Um,
Mm.
there is, you know, I had the honor of showing the intro to the grief film to my parents this past summer.
Time out
And
to say that you guys made a film.
oh,
We talked about that yet. They
yes,
made a film. We will
we made a
discuss
film
this more, but please continue, Z.
about grief and eros, honoring the life and legacy of Saban Fusome. And in showing this film, it's in 5 sections, and in just showing the intro in different places, it has given me glimpses into this question. Because because most people, like you said, have not seen it, have not been invited into that level of connection. And then my parents, it was so fascinating to, and a tremendous gift to be able to share it. And it opened up these conversations we've never had before about how their parents were around grief and how their parents were around grief. And I think that a lot of this is not even explicitly verbalized in our upbringing. It's modeled at a body level of, do we actually witness our community and our family and our elders in a space where they are grounded and centered to allow these big waves of aliveness to come through, whether that's grief or eros or sacred rage in connection with justice, right? But like big aliveness that is about deep truth and deep love. And did we actually get to witness bodies that didn't go into a shame freeze, that didn't go into don't let the kids see this, right? And how deeply that's communicated culturally, ancestrally, intergenerationally. Very few of us get to witness that, or even have the awareness that we haven't witnessed that. I think animals, like we can see animals in more of that, like how readily their bodies know that they're designed to shake and transform the way our bodies are too. And we're also animals, but there's our species. Victor and I actually both did a training together around the shame freeze and how to melt it. And one of the pieces that came through that I found fascinating is human beings, our species needs each other more than other species. And so we're actually programmed to have more shame than other species we because if we do something that violates the agreements, the social contracts, we won't actually survive. Whereas other species, yeah, they can be more independent, but our village nature is also connected to our design. And there's so many more threads there, but I'll just leave some of that in the space here for.
That's so poignant because what immediately came to mind, I mean, there were multiple things, but right there on that last piece about the shame freeze and human beings being wired with more shame, I also think about how isolated most of us are in a million ways, present modern humans. And so we're disconnected from our own bodies. We're disconnected from that sense of communal belonging that really lets us be as fully alive as we might. And how that then reinforces even more shame and the spiraling beneath that. Oh, also
Yes.
Yeah.
mentioned about not having models of the adults in our family and in our community being with these big emotions. The moment you said sacred rage, I was thinking about, yeah, I didn't necessarily see anything other than unchecked rage. Like that's what I grew up with. I grew up in a home with a lot of volatility and a lot of fighting. And so big emotion was expressed in that way, and big love sometimes too, but it was this idea of holding these things as sacred. Certainly wasn't a part of my formative experiences, as is true for many. Victor, what would you add to this delicious soup we're cooking up here?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm gonna throw in the word. It's like the buzzword these days, but it's a true word, and that is colonization.
Mhm.
What takes us away from these, or separates us from having these profound, deeply human experiences. And so to get away from the buzz of it, I'll say colonization, are our domestication, and those are the things that have pulled us away from our natural human context of village, of deep, intimate connections over lifetimes and multiple lifetimes. Just of being with people that are able, willing, and capable of witnessing these deep states that we long to move. So we've moved into a time where one, we try to hold these states ourselves, like Eros in the Greek, and we go like, this is an individual thing, or this is a thing, maybe that you do with a lover or with a therapist or whatever. And we also live in a time where, um, uh, part of the quality of more colonized cultures, societies, is that there's less tolerance for human experiences. There's less tolerances for deep rage. There's less tolerance for big eros. There's less tolerance for larger states of grief. We consider grief to be, something that you get a week off for if someone dies, if you're lucky at work, and then you come back and you're supposed to be productive again. That's how we do grief.
Right.
So yeah, yeah, just to underscore, yeah, I think in a way we're humans often living out of context, out of our context, and our current context doesn't support as much our ability to access our grief and our
Mm.
eros and many other things.
Yeah. I love that. Humans living out of our context really does feel to me like it encapsulates it in such a big way. And I know that the lineage that you two are honoring, the legacy that you two are honoring here, Saban Some, has so much to do with tending relationships to our ancestors, and to, when you talk about a village where there's been relationships over generations and lifetimes, that's, at least that's my understanding, right, is we've traveled together and there's an ancestral inheritance, that talking about space-time being a non-linear thing, that those relationships stay intact. And so I'm curious to hear you, either of you, both of you, speak a little bit more about the importance of tending to connection and relationship with the ancestors, and how that is so much at the center of how we grieve well, how we embrace our erotic nature well, how we human well. we could say.
In my own integration in this moment, this is such a gift and also a bit of a stretch because my understanding of who ancestors are keeps growing and changing. And I would say in the last week I've had my closest experience of staying connected between the veils of life and death and the level of communication and playful, undeniable growing relationship even after someone dies, and I think um, one thing I want to speak to is grief is a metabolizer, and one of the things that Victor was just speaking around colonization is that we've really been trained to not metabolize, to not acknowledge or metabolize colonization. And when we start to open to grieving, it starts to open being with what is, like the radicalness of accepting who's come before us. And when we start to open the possibility of being in close connection with elders and with ancestors and those who've come before us, both in our blood lineage, but also our political ancestors, our artistic ancestors, our, you know, um, professional ancestors who've brought in things that deeply move how we carry our gifts forward, right? And the more than human ancestors and the elemental ancestors, like there's an opening to locating ourselves inside of this larger history of blessings, of perspective, of resource that is so much bigger than us, and also of things that are the unfinished business of our ancestors, which Sabanfu speaks about a lot. And Sabanfu really names this experience like the trees, like how trees and humans breathe, that we breathe out carbon dioxide and trees breathe that in, and then they breathe oxygen, and there's this
Reciprocity.
exchange. Yes, and Sabanfu really spoke to the ancestors that way, that when we grieve, we are feeding the ancestors.
Yeah.
When we grieve personally, when we grieve for their unfinished business, we're feeding them because we're still in bodies. And grief is something that happens in the body. They can't grieve anymore. And they in turn feed us with perspective and with wisdom because they can see things that we may not be able to see here in our bodies in this realm. And so there's this feeding that happens.
And there's this relationship, you know, that yeah, as Z was saying, like there's I remember hearing Sabanfu saying it at one point of it's like the ancestors uh they miss us, like when we don't offer up our grief to them for them, like they miss us. And they have gifts to give us, and we have gifts to give them, and that reciprocity. Um, and it's such a, it's funny because like Z and I are doing this thing, and I feel quite capable of doing this thing, and it's such a new learning for me. Um, so, but anyway, yeah, just the power of this relationship and the reciprocity of it.
Yeah. I mean, and the themes that are being spoken of here, relationship, reciprocity, feeding, tending, this is no different than what fuels the erotic intimacy that we experience with the ones who are still in their bodies. So I think the invitation here, and it's certainly going to be a stretch for some people, right, to consider that we get to tend relationship with ones who are no longer in their bodies in a very equal way to the ones who are still here, like this is what I'm taking away. And I was, I live in a part of Oakland, California, a neighborhood called the Fruit Vale. which is a very heavily, a lot of Mexican and Central American families, and Day of the Dead celebrations, a big thing here. And that happened just a little while prior to us having this conversation, right?
Yeah, right
Dia de
here.
los Muertos. And I think about how many Americans might look to that as like, oh, cool, it's adjacent to Halloween, it's a party. But what's really going on is this deeply held reverence, community, ritual that literally is about feeding the dead. You know, one of the markers of Dia de los Muertos is to prepare a huge meal for your ancestors, make their favorite foods. When I set an ancestor altar for myself for Samhain this year, which happened to fall on Friday night, Shabbat, as an Ashkenazi Jew, I did a Shabbat for my ancestors, like matzo ball soup and everything. And so, you know, it makes me think about how we're opening up the possibility that it's not actually foreign to us. These are the same things you would do if you're receiving family that's coming to visit from out of town, right? Like you're going to meet them with loving energy and a meal and care and want to attend to that relationship. And I'm hearing you share that this is really like about with our ancestors too, and how integral that is to our grieving well, and again, to being more in our fully expressed eroticism too.
Yes.
Yeah. So maybe this would be a good moment to talk a little bit more about who Sabanfu Somé was, and why the two of you are so invested in carrying her legacy forward. Speaking of spiritual ancestors.
Mm,
Yeah, I
so much.
I defer to you a lot on this, D, because one, you had like the initiative to begin this process, and you had the initiative to gather us together and go, let's do Village for a week and film it. So so that's why
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
I look to you in ways.
I didn't know what grief ritual was when I first met Sabanfu. I was actually um had been living in Fruitvale, like you, had fallen in love with someone, and and our relationship was falling apart, and I didn't know what to do. And so when I first heard of Sabanfu, when I first came to know this person who would totally change the trajectory of my life, it was in the context of this incredible grief that the life that I thought I was going to have with this, with who I was going to marry as my wife, was not going to happen, and grieving, um like I wasn't able to be functional, the level of unprocessed grief that was in my system. And so I went to this intro on grief with Sabanfu Somé at CIIS, which is a college in San Francisco. And Sabanfu is this hilarious trickster being who she calls it, yes, I'm going to teach you about grief, but really what was happening, that was happening. And also we were being reminded of our pre-colonial nature of village and love, and grief was part of that. But the root of it was, yeah,
Can you just, like, for those who don't know, like, Sobanfu Somé is not American, and can you speak a little of the culture that
yes,
teachings arise from? It's a very
yes.
stark contrast to your typical modern westernized person. So I think that's an important inclusion here.
Yeah. So Sabanfu Some is from the Dagara people of Burkina Faso in West Africa. And she came here with her husband at the time, Malidoma Some. Malidoma and Sabanfu, they were the Somes. They came here together. And there's a Dagara proverb that says, if you want to protect yourself from the enemy, teach the enemy how to grieve.
Mm.
And so the context, Sabanfu then lived actually in Oakland, Ohlone Land in California, I believe for 20 years. So was she was of Burkina Faso and also deeply immersed in Western culture in the time that she was living here, and so deeply and generously sharing these rituals that she saw we needed even more than her own village. And the context is really this heart ritual for people who have been in a colonized culture, and yeah, so this thread of her her charisma, her vitality, her she was able to reach people. Let me tell you, marketing grief is no joke, right? Like she was able to reach people in Western culture in a profound way because she was able, I believe, she was able to remind us of who we really are.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, I did not have the pleasure of ever being in a ritual with Sabanfu, but I have participated in many a grief ritual by other people carrying her lineage forward. And I know even that one further degree of separation has been life-changing, truly. Like I don't say that lightly. To come into a space, and the first time was actually in a festival setting with a ton of people, and I'm like, wait, I'm gonna just crack my grief open in a tent full of strangers? And the answer is yes, because it turns out we're not actually all that strange from one another when we get down to this essential part of our nature. So it's
Yes.
so beautiful to hear you speak a little about her directly. Victor, you can bring your voice in too.
Yeah, well, just the phrase that you just said, Z, just really resonates with me, and that is being reminded of who you are. And I only had the opportunity to sit in the same room in grief ritual with Sabamfu once for it was like a three day, maybe 4 day grief ritual. Um, but but here I am. I'm a black man living in North America. I've done a lot of work and study and just all stuff to know more about me and who I am in relation to that without having a lot of very solid, like literal information about that. So, we know this story, like many people who go, like, yeah, my family's from Czechoslovakia and Lithuania, and we came here, da 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 da, and we went to this route, and then we landed. I don't have those stories, those literal stories. So there was a piece about stepping into the room with Sabanfu and getting a really clear message among many of the messages, like this is more who you are, and this village experience, this allowing of grief, and this interest, very funny, very tricksterish, of just like reminding us in that room, like she would very sweetly taunt us about how literal our bodies tended to tolerate what she was asking us to do, because we would get to be like, oh, it's like 10:30, going on 11 o'clock. We're getting tired, and she'd be like, just to let you know, we don't stop. We don't stop, and we just keep going until this day. And we're gonna stop because I know who you are.
That's a riot.
Um, so so there's that piece in there for me of having been in the room with her, and having it be another log, uh, some more fuel on the fire of having a clearer connection with who I am, from a lineage standpoint. And even though, I mean, I don't know literally, I don't, that's West Africa. I don't know if, I don't know where in West Africa, but I'm sort of holding that as the larger piece without having that information to go on, the literal information to go on. So anyway, I just want to name that that diaspora piece and the talk a lot about rewilding. This is rewilding.
Yeah. And when you say rewilding, in this context, to me, wild is a synonym for natural, like returning to our true nature, pre-colonization, like that unadulterated, without all the conditioning. And I feel like if we speak about this, particularly sex, the facet of eroticism that is sex, and that many people equate the word sex and eroticism with one another, it's a place where some of us who may not be attuned to the kind of reverential practices that we're speaking of here around grief and eros, like sex sometimes affords that moment of, now I'm in my wildness. Now I'm remembering who I truly am. Even if for like a fleeting second, sometimes it's the moment of the orgasm or what have you, which is what makes it so compelling in a culture that does not offer readily, anyhow, many other ways to connect with our wildness. I don't even know if there's a question in this so much as like an observation. It's like, what when we are available to these more expanded understandings of grief and eros, and not just an understanding in an intellectual way, but when we embody it, when we step into the kind of spaces like you did, creating a village for a week, or the rituals that we have each participated in our own ways, like you get to come into that aliveness through more than just sex alone. Sex has become such a compulsive thing for so many, I think, because of exactly that. And not even that folks would articulate it this way. Like, I want to have sex because I want to feel my aliveness, because I want to feel my authenticity, because I want to remember who I truly am. And yet we know that that's going on for a lot of folks. So I just think it's so beautiful that each of you who has a very formative background in many expressions of, we could say, sex education, right? Sex coaching, so on and so forth, that you've chosen to devote so much of your life force to grief, eros right now. And with that in mind, can you speak a little bit about the film and speak a little bit about these events that people might want to know about?
Yeah. Well, I I had a brain injury 5 years ago, and as I was laying in the dark, I said goodbye to everyone, and I didn't know if I would get to see light again, or hear sounds again, or get out of bed again. And at that moment, I was like, oh my God, I've lived such an extraordinary life. I feel so grateful. And my one regret is that I haven't made this film. And I was like, if I get to live again, I need to make this film because I need other people to feel the way Sabanfu touched us. And so it took me several years to recover and be in the capacity of making this film. And I then turned to Victor and Bernadette Pleasant and some other very dear people. And I said, okay, let's make Village visible through how we dance together and make love together and grieve together and hold each other together. Like, this story is bigger than what I, as one person, could share. I need a village to communicate who Sabanfu was. I need a village to show what a village could be in a modern Western world and time that is willing to remember. And so we we filmed Grief Ritual every day for a week, and there were 4 themes that I chose. And these themes didn't come from Sabanfu, but they came from me and what I saw were areas where grief was so needed and exploration and healing was so needed. And these are the areas that I feel like often we miss each other, or we've never learned how to fully witness or be curious about each other. And those areas are gender, race, eros, or what in Sabanfi wouldn't use the word eros, but she would use the word intimacy, and secure attachment. And I would also say Sabanfu didn't need the word secure attachment. When you're living in village, you don't need that word. But it's a word that we need in our culture to name something that we need that we often don't have. So what we could call that village in her language, right? And so gender, race, eros, and secure attachment, we did grief ritual. Each day we would focus on one of those themes, and we would spend the entire day in the grieving, the remembering, building the altar, time for each of us to share what we're grieving personally and collectively and ancestrally around that theme. We would eat the food that our ancestors enjoyed, and we had an ancestor altar in the kitchen, and we would then make dances from the grief that was coming through us. And we filmed all of that. We had a day of rest in the middle. But we filmed all of that, and then it took another like 2 years to actually edit it down inside of in like works in progress showings with groups of people. And some of the feedback that I received in that process was, originally I thought this film would be its own thing that would go out and live in the world. And instead, what started to happen was people were like, this is not just a film. This is a really big experience. Yeah. And so we actually need to be in a village container, in a ritual container, to even receive the bigness of what we're calling a film. And then next summer in June, Victor and I are going to be co-facilitating with Bernadette Pleasant. Our team has been growing. And Keleni Toto, who's this incredible drummer coming in, because drum is such a part of facilitating this. And we're going to invite people in to explore these same 4 themes through the film. We're calling in 50 people who are cultural shapers, visionaries, erotic leaders, innovators, people who've been deep in fighting for social justice and need some play and breathing room and playmates, right? Like we're just calling in these people to come remember that we are still village beings and we can co-create this again together.
Yeah, and social justice workers that suffer maybe from a lack of eros in their work, and for eros sexual play, perhaps people that suffer maybe from a lack of grief and deeper longing in their work, and everyone in between.
Wow. I feel my longing being like in such a deep way, like it both the event itself, but you're articulating the wider, deeper, vaster longing of living in this way. Not, like, yes, and from we can only meet ourselves and one another where we are. So from where we are, a 4-day event is like radical. And I feel my longing to live inside of this, which is what this is all about, a reclaiming and a returning to this truly essential aspect of what it is to be human. Wow, just I have such tremendous respect for what you two are pouring your life force into by bringing this forward, what you've already done. And certainly we will be sharing links to everything that has been mentioned. Is there anything more that you would want somebody listening to know about where to find you or this work, or like any last little threads to tie up about this, even though we could talk for 6 more hours, no doubt?
I have created a whole year-long program around this film, and some people are ready for different size experiences. And when I teach kink, which is really the same stuff we're all talking about, because kink is one of like my favorite ways to expand our capacity.
It's a whole other podcast, right? That's a whole other podcast.
Yeah. But I will say that There's a 3-month immersion I teach around kink and playing with power and gender through dance. And then the level 2 of that is this full year-long experience where we go through all 5 sections of the film and we do community ritual. And it's taken years to actually build enough foundation of local community to do that. But when I look at the roots of where this came from, Sabanfu, when she brought this here to the West, it was often inside of like, oh yeah, I'll go to a weekend thing because that's more something we orient to in Western culture. But I've been slowly building like what happens if we actually do this over a whole year and we keep coming back with season and rhythm and ritual. And so that's like the deep slow dive for people who live in the larger Bay Area. And so you can find out more about the really long, like full-time ritual experience, as well as the deep dive 4-day. In my website is embodymorelove.com, and it has all the information for this collaboration that we've been speaking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my website is rewilderos.com, and you're welcome to go there and find out ways of landing with me in person, on Zoom, events that I do, and exploring this longing we have to be fully human.
Yes to that. And again, all of these links will be in the show notes. Please go and find out more about what Victor and Z are up to in the world individually and jointly. I can say nothing but the best things about both of them. Also, Victor gives some really good social media content, just saying.
Milk,
Thank you.
cow, milk and cow.
Thank you so much for bringing your whole selves, your beautiful human selves to this conversation. It has been so enriching. And if you who are listening loved this, then please say so. Give it a good rating, write a little review. It means the world when you share. This is how we spread more of this goodness and go deeper together in the wider world. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you next time.
Thank you.